Darkness surrounded us, thick and suffocating, pressing against the hull of the submersible like an ancient force. We were descending into a part of the ocean no human had ever seen, a trench deeper than what should have existed, a place that defied topographical records, as if it had been deliberately erased from history. The onboard instruments ticked downward, 23,000 feet. The hum of the sub's engines filled the cramped space, steady, rhythmic, but beneath it was a faint static, an intermittent pulse of sound that had no source. It had started just after we passed 15,000 feet. The comms officer, Katri, kept adjusting her headset, frowning as she tried to filter it out. Still hearing it? I asked, my voice low. She shook her head, but not in answer, more in frustration. It's not interference. It's not even a signal. It's something else. The expedition had been assembled hastily, pulling together a mix of military and scientific personnel. Officially, we were here for geological research, but I knew better. I'd been in this business long enough to recognize when a mission had layers we weren't supposed to see through. The man funding the expedition, Dr. Caldwell, sat across from me, rigid, his knuckles white as they gripped the safety restraints. A government scientist, all polished composure on the surface. But beneath that veneer, there was something close to dread in his eyes. He hadn't spoken much since we submerged. Beside him, Becket, our deep-sea navigator, stared at the sonar screen. "We should be hitting the bottom soon," he muttered. He was wrong. There was no bottom. At least, not where we expected. The trench kept going. 25,000 feet. 26,000. The depth gauge flickered. Then, for a full 10 seconds, it showed nothing at all. Just empty blackness on the readout. Becket swore under his breath. "The hell is this?" I leaned forward. "Talk to me." "The instruments are resetting," he said. "They can't get a read on the terrain below us." The intercom crackled. From the surface vessel above, mission control patched in. "Odyssey, do you copy?" Caldwell clicked on his headset. "We read you." There was a pause. Then, "Your descent telemetry just dropped. We're getting ghost readings. Are you seeing anything anomalous?" We all exchanged glances. Then Katch returned, her face pale. "Sir, we're getting something. It's not the terrain." I followed her gaze to the sonar. The screen showed an outline. A structure. Impossible. It was massive, nearly a mile long, buried beneath layers of sediment. The hull was smooth, unlike any known submarine or wreck. Its shape was sleek, almost organic, yet symmetrical in a way that felt unnatural. And it wasn't just sitting there. It was glowing. A faint, rhythmic pulse, almost like a heartbeat, deep within its core. Dr. Caldwell exhaled sharply. "My God!" Becket turned to him, his expression dark. "You knew, didn't you? You knew there was something down here." The scientist hesitated, then nodded. "There was a signal," he admitted. "We picked it up over a year ago. A repeating pulse. Something ancient. Something non-terrestrial. Non-terrestrial." I stared at the structure. It was old, but not ruined. Not a relic of a civilization lost to time. It was waiting. We weren't the ones discovering it. We were the ones being allowed to find it. 28,000 feet. Then, all at once, the submersible lost power. The lights died. The engines stuttered into silence. The emergency systems should have kicked in. They didn't. For a single, endless moment, we were weightless in the dark. And then, a sound. Not static. Not sonar. A voice. Not through the comms, but from inside the sub. A whisper, faint, fractured, like a transmission played backward. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the feeling. It was calling to us. The emergency lights flickered back on, painting the cabin in dim red hues. The sub rocked slightly, stabilizing. Instruments sputtered back to life, but something had changed. The structure had opened. A gaping entrance now yawned before us, as if the vessel itself had sensed our arrival and decided to welcome us inside. The order came from the surface. "Proceed." Beckett's hands hovered over the controls, hesitant. "This is a mistake." Caldwell didn't even look at him. "Go." The sub drifted forward, swallowed by the black maw of the alien wreck. Inside, the light from our flood lamps barely reached the walls. But what little they touched revealed something worse than decay. There were bodies. At first, I thought they were human. Then I saw them shift. They weren't decomposed. They weren't dead in any natural sense. They were fused into the walls. Limbs stretched unnaturally. Mouths open in silent screams. Flesh and metal, indistinguishable. Something happened here. Something that shouldn't have been possible. Katri sucked in a breath. What the hell is this place? A cold certainty settled into my chest. A trap. We had been led here. And now we weren't alone. The whisper returned. Louder this time. I turned. Saw something move at the edge of the light. A figure tall, shifting in and out of focus like a mirage, standing just beyond the glow. Its eyes locked onto me. And then it smiled. The sub's alarm screamed. A crew member was gone. No sign of him. No trace. Only his comms, repeating his last words in an endless, distorted loop. I think there's someone here with us. The last thing I saw before the lights cut out completely was something crawling from the walls and grinning. The silence that followed was suffocating. For a long moment, none of us moved. The emergency lighting flickered, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The space where Becket had been standing was empty. His helmet light had vanished. No movement, no sign of a struggle. Just gone. Katri broke the silence first. Where the hell is he? Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but it cut through the stillness like a blade. Caldwell's face was pale, his eyes darting around the interior of the submersible, searching for something, anything, that would explain what had just happened. The comms crackled. At first, it was just static, but then, I think there's someone here with us. Beckett's voice. I turned sharply, scanning the sonar feed, the thermal imaging, anything that might show where he had gone. Nothing. His signal was still in the sub. The system showed him standing right where he had been before he vanished. Katri pulled off her headset, her breathing uneven. This is wrong. This is so wrong. A thud. Soft. Muffled. Like something brushing against the hull. We all turned toward the viewport. The murky depths outside were thick with sediment, particles drifting in slow motion. The glow from the structure outside pulsed rhythmically, steady, almost intentional. And then movement. Something passed in front of the submersible. It was human-shaped, but distorted. A figure drifting in the water, limbs too long, joints bent at impossible angles. It turned its head toward us, and for a single heart-stopping moment, I thought I saw Beckett's face. Then it was gone. Katri gasped. We need to get out of here. We need to. The subsystems rebooted all at once. The lights surged to full power. Screens flashed with cascading error messages. Oxygen level spiked, then dropped. The depth gauge spun wildly. Then a new alarm. The hatch. It had been unlocked from the outside. That should have been impossible. Caldwell's voice was low, almost inaudible. Something wants us inside. I didn't need to be told twice. We had come this far. We had lost someone. And now, the only way forward was through. I reached for the controls, steering the sub deeper into the alien structure. The entrance widened before us, swallowing us into its depths. The walls inside were smooth, metallic, but with an almost organic texture. It felt like the inside of something alive. The corridor narrowed, twisting, leading us forward in a way that felt deliberate. It was guiding us, directing us. We passed another chamber, and that was when I saw the first body. Human, or at least it had been. Its suit was ancient, the design decades, maybe centuries out of date. The body was suspended in the water, limbs stretched unnaturally, fused into the walls like an insect caught in amber. Katri swallowed. Jesus Christ. Caldwell's expression was unreadable. They weren't the first. That much was obvious. There were more bodies ahead. Dozens. Some human, others different. The closer we got, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a crash site. It was a graveyard. And then the whispering started again. At first, it was distant like a memory just out of reach. But the further we moved, the clearer it became. Voices. Familiar voices. My own voice. Katri jerked back, shaking her head. I'm not hearing this. I'm not. Keep moving, Caldwell said, his voice tight. "We're close." "Close to what?" I shot back. "Getting ourselves killed." But I already knew the answer. We weren't here by accident. The ship had called us. The moment we reached the core chamber, the entire structure shuddered. A deep, resonating hum pulsed through the walls, through the water, through us. The room was massive. It shouldn't have been possible, shouldn't have fit within the dimensions of the wreck we had seen from the outside. At its center was a machine. No, not a machine. A pod. And inside, I took an involuntary step forward, my breath catching in my throat. It was Becket, alive, eyes wide, mouth slightly open in a silent scream, suspended in some kind of fluid, motionless but aware. Katri exhaled sharply. No. Caldwell was already moving. He touched the console next to the pod, scanning the unreadable glyphs that pulsed beneath his fingers. "It's a stasis chamber. It's been running for..." He stopped. I stepped closer. "For how long?" His lips barely moved. "It's not counting forward." My stomach turned. It was counting backward. The timer wasn't marking how long Becket had been inside. It was marking how long it had been waiting to release him. The whispers grew louder. I turned back toward the pod, and Beckett's eyes snapped toward me. The liquid inside the chamber rippled as he moved. A slow, unnatural motion, like something adjusting to a body it wasn't used to wearing. And then, very slowly, he smiled. The walls lurched. The ship woke up. The corridor behind us collapsed in on itself. The structure twisted, the walls shifting like muscle and sinew. The floor beneath us wasn't metal anymore. It was warm, pulsing. "We have to go," Katri whispered. Caldwell didn't move. His gaze was locked on the pod, his face frozen in an expression I couldn't quite read. "Doctor," I said. No response. Then he turned to me, slowly. His pupils were dilated, his skin paler than before. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted them. "We can't leave," he said. His voice was wrong, like it was layered, like something else was speaking with him. Katri grabbed my arm. "I don't care what the hell is happening. We're leaving." I didn't argue. We moved fast, pushing back toward the sub. The corridors twisted as if reshaping themselves. The ship wasn't just alive, it was aware. It wasn't just watching us, it was learning us. The whispers became words. "Stay. You belong." We hit the hatch. Katri punched in the override. The sub's exterior lights flickered, casting erratic flashes across the corridor. For a moment, I thought we had made it. Then I turned back. Caldwell stood in the doorway. His eyes were bleeding. His lips moved, but the voice that came out wasn't his. "You were never supposed to find this." And then, he lunged. Katri screamed. I threw myself forward, hitting the emergency seal. The hatch slammed shut between us, cutting off the sound, the sight, the thing that had once been Dr. Caldwell. The sub powered up. The ship shuddered. As we pulled away, I saw the structure start to close, swallowing itself, sealing back into the ocean floor, as if it had never been there at all. And then, one last transmission crackled through the comms. It was Beckett's voice. "I think there's someone here with us." We didn't look back. The sub rose in silence. Neither of us spoke. The engines hummed beneath us, steady, mechanical, unaffected by the madness we had just left behind. The pressure gauges fluctuated slightly, adjusting to the change in depth, but everything else read normal. As if nothing had happened, I gripped the control panel tighter. My hands ached from how hard I'd been clenching my fists. My breathing was slow, forced, deliberate, an attempt to steady my pulse. But no matter how much I tried to ground myself, my mind kept pulling me back. Back to the ship, back to Beckett's face behind the glass, smiling. Back to Caldwell's blood-filled eyes and his voice that wasn't his own. Katri sat next to me, her hands trembling in her lap. She hadn't stopped shaking since we sealed the hatch. Her eyes flicked toward the sonar, scanning it over and over, as if expecting it to lie. Finally, she whispered, "We left him." I turned to her. "Caldwell." She shook her head. "Becket." The name sent an immediate chill down my spine. I opened my mouth and closed it. What was there to say? Becket had disappeared. Then he had returned. Not dead, not alive, but something else. Something that had been waiting. I didn't say any of that. Instead, I just stared at the sonar, where the wreck was supposed to be. Nothing. Not even a signal. Not even a trace. As if the ship had never existed. The sub kept ascending. 15,000 feet. 10,000. The water grew brighter, tinged with the faint glow of sunlight reaching through the depths. I let out a slow breath. We're almost there. Katri didn't respond. She was staring past me, through the viewport. Her voice was barely audible. We're not alone. I followed her gaze. At first I saw nothing. Just the water, illuminated in artificial light, swirling in gentle currents. The sub's beams cut through the black, revealing nothing but sediment. Then a shadow moved. I felt my entire body go rigid. Something was outside. A shape just barely visible. Not quite solid. Not quite there. My stomach twisted. That's impossible. We're at 9,000 feet. Katri's voice was deadpan. So, is everything else that's happened today? The figure was drifting just outside the range of our lights. Too far to see clearly. But the way it moved, slow, deliberate, watching us, sent a wave of cold fear through me. Then it got closer. I reached for the controls. We need to move. Katri didn't argue. I pushed the throttle forward, increasing our ascent. The engines whined in protest, but the sub obeyed, speeding toward the surface. The water outside blurred as we moved, the figure slipping back into the darkness. Then the radio crackled. I froze. Katri turned to me, eyes wide. Did you? The static surged, warped, twisted, as if the signal was coming from somewhere it shouldn't. Then a voice. I think there's someone here with us. My pulse stopped. Becket. The same words. The same tone. The same faint distortion, like a recording played one too many times. I swallowed, hand hovering over the controls. It's not him. Katri's breathing was shallow. How do you know? Because it was too perfect. Becket had said those words before he disappeared. The transmission wasn't an SOS, wasn't even a message. It was something else. A memory. Or a trap. I kept my hand off the radio. We didn't respond. The static continued. I think there's someone here with us. Over and over. The same loop. No variation. No desperation. Then, another voice. Deeper. Wrong. You were never meant to leave. Katri screamed. The lights flickered. The sub lurched. I grabbed the controls, trying to steady the ascent, but it felt like something had grabbed us. An invisible force pulling us back down. I pushed the thrusters to full power. The engines roared in protest. The sub strained against the weight of the ocean, but we were losing altitude. 8,000 feet. 9,000. 10. We were falling. And then, the knocking started. A rhythmic tap against the viewport. Katri's voice was barely a whisper. No, I didn't want to look. I had to look. I turned my head just enough to see a hand pressing against the glass from the outside. Fingers splayed, pale skin stretched over bones that weren't quite human. The nails were cracked, the knuckles swollen. The flesh looked waterlogged, bloated. Wrong. And then, as I watched, another hand appeared beside it. Then another. Then another. Hundreds of them. Reaching, crawling, pressing against the sub as if trying to peel it open. My vision swam. My thoughts blurred. Something whispered in my ear. Not through the comms. Not through the radio. Right next to me. You don't belong here. The sub jerked violently. I slammed forward, my head cracking against the control panel. Pain shot through my skull, stars exploding behind my eyes. The world spun. Then, light. Blinding, brilliant, white light. I gasped. We were breaking the surface. The sub erupted from the water like a dying beast, metal groaning under the sudden pressure change. The engines coughed, sputtered, then died. Silence. Katri slumped beside me, dazed. I could feel blood trickling down my forehead. The control panels were glitching, monitors filled with unreadable symbols. But we were up. We were out. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then the radio crackled one last time. A voice. Not Beckett's. Not Caldwell's. Mine. You were never supposed to leave. The signal cut out, and the ocean below us was empty. The ship was waiting for us when we surfaced. A ghostly silhouette against the dark horizon. The research vessel Endeavour bobbed on the waves, its floodlights casting long, silver trails across the water. Katri was barely conscious beside me, still slumped against the sub's control panel, her breathing ragged. The pressure of the dive had taken its toll, but she was alive. I didn't know what to feel about that. We should have been relieved, should have been grateful, but something about our return felt wrong, like we had slipped through a door that was never meant to be reopened. The ship's crew was already moving as we drifted in, ropes securing the sub, figures leaning over the railings, their voices sharp and urgent. As the hatch was forced open, the first thing I saw was the ship's captain, Commander Rhodes, his lined face drawn tight with unease. "Where's Caldwell?" he asked. Katri shuddered at the name. I swallowed hard. "Gone." Rhodes' eyes flicked past me, searching the empty sub, his jaw tightening. "And Becket?" I just shook my head. A silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. There were no further questions. Not yet. The crew knew better than to demand explanations from men and women pulled out of the abyss. 2 medics moved in, helping us from the sub. The moment I stepped onto the deck, a wave of nausea slammed into me. The air was cold, damp, filled with the tang of salt and oil. But beneath it, something else. A smell that shouldn't have followed us from the trench. Metal, blood, and something older. I wiped a shaking hand across my face. "You look like hell," Rhodes muttered. "You should see the other guy." I meant it as a joke, but my voice was too hollow. The words too empty. Rhodes didn't press. He just gestured toward the bridge. "Debrief in 10. I hesitated, my gut twisting. "We shouldn't stay here." Rhodes frowned. "What?" I forced myself to meet his eyes. "Get us moving. Now." His brow furrowed. "We just pulled you out of." "Rhodes." I grabbed his arm, ignoring the way my fingers trembled. "Start the engines. Set course for anywhere but here." For a moment, he just studied me. Then, with a muttered curse, he turned to the bridge. "Get us underway." The deckhand scattered. Within seconds, the low thrum of the ship's engines rumbled through the floor. The Endeavor began to shift, turning away from the still, black expanse of the ocean. I exhaled. Then I heard it. A whisper. Not from the water. Not from the ship. From inside me. "You never left." I stumbled, grabbing the railing for support. My heartbeat roared in my ears, a sudden, overwhelming sensation of vertigo pulling at me. Katri's hand was suddenly on my arm, grounding me. Her grip was ice cold. "You hear it too," she murmured. I couldn't answer. She swallowed hard. "It's inside us, isn't it?" I turned away, unwilling to meet her gaze. Because I already knew the answer. We weren't alone. We had brought something back. The debrief was a mess. The crew had questions. They got nothing. Rhodes pressed, demanding answers, but Katri barely spoke, and I only gave fragments. Technical failures, structural collapse, psychological strain, the usual lies. Because the truth was still out there. And worse, it was here too. The ship pressed forward into the night. Hours passed. Katri eventually fell asleep in the infirmary. I didn't have that luxury. I stood alone at the stern, staring into the waves. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, black and depthless. It should have felt comforting to be on the surface again. But the longer I stared, the more I felt something watching back. A chill crawled up my spine. Then, in the reflection of the water, I saw it. A shape, standing directly behind me. I spun, heart hammering. Nothing, just the empty deck, the quiet hum of the engines, the Endeavor's lifeboats shifting slightly with the movement of the waves. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to move, to walk away, to find something, anything, to distract myself. I barely made it 2 steps before the radio on my hip crackled to life. "I think there's someone here with us." The world tilted. The radio shouldn't have been on. It wasn't transmitting, and that wasn't Rhodes' voice. It wasn't Katri's. It was Becket's. Every muscle in my body locked. Then, from below deck, a thud, soft, muffled, like something moving. I turned toward the hatch leading down into the ship's interior. The corridors stretched before me, bathed in dim emergency lighting, silent except for the occasional groan of the hull. I shouldn't have gone down there. I went anyway. The air felt different below deck. Stale, heavy, thick. The corridors twisted in familiar patterns, but they didn't feel right. The walls seemed closer than they should have been. The lights flickered with every step I took. A door stood open ahead of me. A storage bay. Another whisper slid through my mind. You never left. I stepped inside. At first, I didn't see anything. The room was dimly lit, crates stacked against the walls, equipment secured in place. But the smell, that same metallic tang. I took another step. The door slammed shut behind me. I spun. My heart stopped. Something was standing in a room with me. I couldn't see it. Not fully, but I could see the outline. A figure. Tall. Wrong. It didn't move at first. Then, it stepped forward. I tried to move. My body wouldn't obey. The lights flickered, and for a single, perfect moment, I saw its face. Not Becket. Not Caldwell. Me. A perfect copy. Staring back. It tilted its head, mirroring me. Then it smiled. The lights died. I woke up on the deck. Katri was shaking me. Jesus, say something. I gasped, air flooding my lungs. My head pounded. My skin was cold. I looked around. The sun was rising. The ship was still moving. Ow! My voice cracked. How did I get here? Katri pulled back, eyes filled with fear. You walked up here yourself, she whispered. I felt something in my pocket. My fingers closed around the object before I could think. I pulled it out. A radio. Old. Rusted. Caked in sediment. I turned it over in my hands, my stomach twisting, because I had seen it before. In the wreck. Beside Becket's pod. A single thought slammed into my skull with the force of a bullet. I never left. I wasn't me. Not anymore. The ocean stretched ahead, endless and indifferent. And somewhere, beneath its surface, something else smiled.